How about now? Can you hear me now? I apologize. Now, let me go back to what I was saying. I apologize for the late start. In part, it was for a good reason, because yesterday I went to the church and installed Starlink. So we now have internet that hopefully is capable of, handling the live stream. Starlink's done pretty good for us so far, as long as I've done my part, and most of it is my fault when everything doesn't run well. And so, assuming everything works, now I don't make you a whole lot of promises, but assuming everything works, we will be going live Sunday morning. So you could tune in to the YouTube channel at, I don't know if I'll do the whole song service, but probably, around the time the preaching starts, which is, I would guess, 11:20, something like that. Maybe a little bit sooner than that. You can tune in and you will be able to enjoy our sermons live, and they'll be streaming in the immediate moment, right? And so that will be a really fun time, really fun opportunity. So I hope you can join us. Oh, wait, hold on. I am not telling you the truth. We have Sunday school as well, so we'll be live streaming Sunday school. So you need to tune in around 10:05 probably, Central Standard Time. And you will be able to watch our series. We'll be looking at the last days again. And so I'm just really excited. I know that you've been waiting for it. Some of you yesterday actually took the time to check us out and catch us testing our live stream, and everything seemed to work well. If you wanted to see me wearing a Texas Rangers hoodie, that was your opportunity, okay? So really excited about it. Here's another great thing that means. Because we have internet and we'll be able to stream, you are going to be able to watch the Bible conference. Now, I would still love you to be there. I think that it would be a whole lot more fun if you can be there in person. But I understand life is busy, and sometimes traveling is not always possible. So if you are going to be unable to be there in person, you are still going to have the opportunity to watch the Bible conference. It's going to be the last weekend of March. So March 28th through the 30th. Really excited about that. And so I hope that you are getting ready for it. And with that, that's about all I have for you as far as updates regarding the ministry. Thank you all so much. You have been a big help. Thanks to your generosity, your donations, your support, I was able to get a nice router that is going to be able to operate at the speed that we need to. So thank you. A lot of the stuff that you see at the church is not actually the church's equipment at all. Most of the equipment that you see being used at the church has been made possible by you and your support. And so I truly do appreciate that. Okay. Now, we've had a few interesting things happen as far as politics and the world goes that I do want to talk about just a little bit. So a few things that we want to be keeping track of. Number one is we had that really strange event in which the CEO of a major health insurance company was targeted and assassinated, I guess, to a certain degree. I don't know at what point you become assassinated. How important do you have to be? How rich? How famous? But I imagine most of you have already heard about it. But it really is quite a strange event. We don't know who the suspect is. Still, the manhunt is ongoing. And I probably don't have to go into detail as far as what actually happened. You've probably already heard about it. You may have even seen some of the news clips in which this United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, there was a conference event going on in New York, and on the sidewalk, this suspect comes up behind him, shoots him in the back multiple times. I don't know if, from what I've seen, I have not seen the whole video. The one I've seen is the one that's cut short. But I have heard that the handgun jammed a few times. He was using a suppressor, silencer, and I can tell you that silencers can affect the reliability of the gun because it's not it's not designed from the factory to cycle with a big heavy thing hanging off the end of it, so it can mess with the operation of the mechanism, and so it can lead to some jams. What I heard is maybe there was some jams going on, and so he had to eject some. And when you have a jam in a handgun, normally when you rack the slide, that actually is going to eject very often another live round. So I don't know if the casings or the live rounds themselves were what was found on the sidewalk, but they were written. There was several different things written on the casings. And I can't remember even what all they were, but it's clearly this was a targeted thing. It wasn't like this was a mugging. This was absolutely a person who was set out to kill this CEO, Brian Thompson. And what's really interesting is, are we going to be able to track this guy down? Are we going to find out who did it? It's amazing how in today's world of technology, it almost seems like it would be impossible to get away with this. I mean, just how, with whether it's Facebook or tracking cell phones, cameras on every corner. One of the interesting things is he was wearing a mask. Remember when COVID came and it normalized wearing a mask? So all those Antifa and Black Lives Matter protesters went out into the streets wearing masks because, hey, it's COVID, and you couldn't identify them. Well, you kind of get what precedents you set. So he was able to go out there with a hood, with a mask on. Nobody thought anything of it because, hey, it's New York, and kills this man. It's going to be really interesting to see, are they going to be able to track him down, figure out who this was? Now, another interesting thing is how some of the people on the left are responding. Obviously, people on the left, they want universal health care, and so their idea of, insurance, health insurance companies is horrible and terrible, and I get it, right? Health insurance is extremely frustrating. But it's only frustrating, I guess, it depends on how old you are. But it's probably frustrating for everybody. As a young person, right, like the last time I had to go to the doctor was, I don't know, I'm probably due for another one, right? I'm going to get sick and have to go, but I had double pneumonia. That was probably 3 years ago, and so I went to a local clinic and got some antibiotics and was better. But when you're young, health insurance is frustrating because you're paying all this money and yet you never heartily use it. And I will say, though, with our triplets, that was nice, the health insurance company. But as you get older, then probably the health insurance company isn't paying enough, right? You've been paying all this money in all these years, and then when you finally need them to come through, then they just can't quite cover the bill. So the left has a bunch of hatred for the health insurance companies. Not everybody, I think, is a big fan of them anyways, and the left is kind of responding in a less than becoming manner. There have been some comments like, you get what you deserve, things like that, kind of ugly things. Certainly, we would not say that this man deserved to be killed. But it does make you wonder, are we going to be able to find him? And is it possible that we may see more of this stuff take place in the future? I don't know. We hope not. All right, now, with that being said, a few other things that I want to talk about before we get to our main talking point tonight, our main discussion. And that's going to be the Supreme Court arguments, for one, that was held for the Tennessee transgender issue. I talked about it on Tuesday. I believe it was Tuesday. Maybe it was Wednesday. I think it was maybe Wednesday. And we discussed that they were going to be having their oral arguments. And truth be told, I don't think that the Supreme Court is leaning towards striking down the Tennessee bill, which bans the transgender surgeries and procedures and practices on minors. That's the whole point of the bill, right? We want it banned. Tennessee passed the bill. It was taken to the courts in Tennessee. Tennessee court withheld it, and it's been appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it was interesting hearing the arguments. The left has no good arguments for transgenderism. They just have to claim, well, it may help some children, when in reality, the data, I don't think they can even argue that the data says it helps the majority of kids. The majority of children are just as worse off, because if you pump a child full of hormones and you perform surgeries on them, that did nothing to fix the mental problem, because it is a mental issue. All right, transgenderism, it is a health crisis, okay, of mental faculty, and that is absolutely the case. So the Supreme Court, seems like they're going to side with the Tennessee court, which would be excellent, and the precedent set, so other states would be able to pass their own bills banning those things and not have to worry about the Supreme Court striking those bills down. One of the things that was very interesting, though, is the proponents of transing the children. They had an attorney who herself was a woman who had had surgeries and been on testosterone to give the kind of the vague appearance of a man. Like, imagine a woman with some 5 o'clock shadow, I guess, and that's about what you could expect. Did not sound like a man at all. She sounded like a woman. And frustratingly, the Supreme Court referred to her as Mr. Strangio. Yeah, I'm not making up the last name. That was her last name. Mr. Strangio. That's frustrating to me, how the Supreme Court plays into it. Because if you're saying, hold on, we should be transing the kids, that's not good. And yet you're going to just turn right around and then you're going to play by the games of using the preferred the preferred title of whatever individual. But coming from the Daily Wire, you could read up on the article right here. The Supreme Court does look to be upholding the Tennessee law. It's not quite time for them to make their decision. I think that's still going to be maybe for a couple more months, but it is looking very promising. Nothing about the oral arguments that took place on Wednesday are looking like they're going to overturn anything. Obviously some of the liberal judges, Ketanji Brown, Jackson, Sonia Sotomayor, they obviously are going to want to strike down the Tennessee law. Jackson tried to argue, remember, she's the one that doesn't know what a woman is. She's not a biologist. She compared it to old laws that prevented interracial marriage, and that's what's funny. That's what they always go to. That if you allow them to not trans the kids, the next thing you're going to see is them banning interracial marriage. Nobody cares about interracial marriage. Nobody's fighting against it. What we are fighting against is the redefinition of marriage and male and female. So I'm going to continue to call for the Obergefell decision to be, is that right, Obergefell? I keep getting these wrong. The Dobbs decision struck down Roe versus Wade. Obergefell completely obliterated what men and women are by claiming to redefine marriage. I will always be calling for the Obergefell decision to be struck down. Let it go back to the states, okay, so we can have some common sense back in our societies and communities. Now, the only other thing that I want you to be keeping an eye on in our politics and our culture is the Daniel Penny trial. You'll recall Daniel Penny, there was an individual who was on a subway train in New York, and I'm trying to remember what his name was. He was a homeless man, a black man who clearly seemed to be on drugs. He was yelling threats. Jordan Neely. He was yelling threats at the passengers. Didn't quite know, what is this guy going to do? Daniel Penny, a Marine, trained in hand-to-hand combatives, probably jiu-jitsu and some grappling, things like that, puts him in a choke hold or a submission hold, and the choke hold, from what it looked like to me, it's more of like a blood choke. It doesn't cut off his airflow. It just cuts off blood flow to the brain to where eventually you'll just lose consciousness. And of course, this Jordan Neely ends up passing, but he did not die immediately. When the police arrived, he was still living, but anyways, certainly it was not Daniel Penny's intentions to lead to Jordan Neely's death. He was focused on protecting the passengers. In my opinion, it's a clear and cut ordeal. Sad that Jordan Neely passed, but Daniel Penny does not deserve to face any prison time. He was protecting passengers. He had every right to, he was justified in his conduct entirely. We're going to wait and see how the New York case plays out. Ever since the Derek Chauvin trial, George Floyd and all that, it's hard to know. Are they going to get a fair trial? If Jordan Neely is seen as a martyr and they are seeking to avenge him, Daniel Penny will not get a free trial, and he will get hit with the highest charges possible, and he will go to prison for a long time. If the justice system, if the court of law upholds, then hopefully Daniel Penny will be exonerated of those charges. All right, so with that, that's the major things going on. We're still waiting to see how things are going to go with the Trump cabinet appointments. I would like to see, obviously, most of them get through, not Pam Bondi. Some of the others I don't have an issue with. She's my biggest complaint. She's not pro-Second Amendment enough. I hope that people realize that. And if she does get nominated and approved by the Senate, then people need to hold her feet to the fire to focus on her job and not not impose on our Second Amendment rights, our God-given rights. All right, now, with that brings us to a close of the political section of the day. What I want to do now is get into the culture, Christianity, fellowship, faith, theology segment. And what I want to ask is, what are the biggest threats to Christianity? Title of today's show, what are the biggest threats to Christianity? And I want your thoughts. So if you are watching today, okay, I want to kind of be tracking you. Friday is kind of also our Fellowship Friday. It's an opportunity where we kind of chat a little bit. So this can be a part of it. What do you think Christianity at large are the biggest threats are? Now, we could get really narrow and we could say, well, they got to understand rightly dividing the Bible. They've got to start taking the Bible literally. They need to start using a good translation. There's all sorts of things that we could get into. But what I want to do is maybe just take a more broader approach, okay? Because I do think that our society would benefit from having even just a sound, like a sound conservative Presbyterian church. All right? I don't agree with the Presbyterians on doctrine. I'm not Calvinist. I think that they are incorporating, sacraments, and so I know they're incorporating sacraments. It's a very problematic doctrine. At the same time, I think that if there were more conservative Presbyterian churches that were at least dedicated to studying the Bible, convicted about their beliefs and their doctrine, then we would probably be a little bit better off, at least as far as the values, principles, morals of society, right? So while we could get really narrow, get really specific, what I want us to do is consider at large, what are the biggest problems? If you go to any church, any denomination, what are the issues that you see? What are the biggest threats, okay? And I think that I have a good friend. I haven't seen him on our live stream lately. I don't know how often he gets to watch, but first name's Rich. He's former military guy, did a lot of really interesting stuff. And I was talking to him about different matters, and the major thing that he emphasized to me was threat assessment and taking an evaluation of your assets and what are the biggest possibilities. So, for example, obviously, as a father and as a male, I will play interesting scenarios in my head, right? There's always the big bad guy who's trying to attack us, and I've got to fight him, right? While that does pose as a possibility, and I carry the necessary tools on a daily basis to handle those problems, the reality is a much more likely threat is my child choking. Right? One of my kids choking on food. So I have a life vac. We keep a life vac in our kitchen. There's a life vac in the car. We have those things. You should get a life vac if you don't already have one. I've talked about them before. They're great, and they're proven and tested. I've never used one personally, thank goodness, but they're proven and tested. What are some other things? Well, they could potentially, my son could wander outside and any number of manners of mischief could incur. He could be out in front of a vehicle, so we have to keep track of where he is. I had the door chimes on our system at the house, and I probably need to reinstall them. I don't know how they got turned off. But there's certain measures that we have to do, right? And so what are the most likely, I would say, is what we need to assess first. Let's try to meet the most immediate and most likely threats to our church and to our churches across the nation. What do you think the most likely threats are? What are the biggest issues that we may have to deal with? And as I think through that, there are problems that exist already, okay? We could list all those different problems. Bad doctrine, bad theology, those are all prevalent in churches. A lot of churches meet and don't even think about doctrine, okay? They're not even discussing matters of salvation, okay? They will simply speak of being saved in the most vague of terms. Do you have a relationship with Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Does Jesus know you? Come on now, let's get specific here. What do those words even mean? Let's use some biblical terms, biblical phrases. But furthermore, there's some other issues. There's not any men in the church hardly anymore. Men are continually less invested in church. But that's something that's already present, right? It's already here. What are some things that, though, are on the horizon that, while we're dealing with these immediate problems, absolutely true, what is still to come? What are the biggest threats that we've got to protect against? I see that Mary responded, she says liberalism. I think that's exactly right, and that's one of the major threats. And what's really scary about this, liberalism, actually I had that exact word written down in my notes. What's really scary about it is conservative churches are not always good at detecting liberalism. You see, Calvinism is really good at infiltrating churches. All right, let's just use that example, Calvinism. You will have churches will hire a preacher, they're desperate to find a pastor, so they'll hire whoever comes from the seminary or whoever comes recommended from an association or whatever, and all they've been doing is reading theology books, John MacArthur, John Piper, Spurgeon, things like that. And they will not be upfront about being Calvinist, and I've talked about this before, and then once they're hired, they will start to implement more and more Calvinist theology, okay? They'll start using words that they hadn't used before, effectual calling, election, and before you know it, they have taken that church, which was maybe just kind of a standard evangelical church that didn't have much Calvinism as far as in their salvation. Now, they may have some predeterminism as far as world events and things like that, but not an overtly Calvinist church. And before you know it, they are a Calvinist church. They're even reciting Westminster Confessions, things like that, right? So the way I see liberalism is a lot like Calvinism. Liberalism works its way into churches. And it does so by utilizing or taking advantage of people who don't have good doctrine, people who don't have good theology. So they will hone in on key passages of Scripture, often kingdom passages, like in the Gospels, Jesus talking about the least of these, who is thy neighbor, and they will manipulate those passages to expand the context well beyond what the text is referring to, and then make it the church's mission statement to be this social activist group. And it'll all start very slowly. I think David Platt's a good example. There's not one point in David Platt's progression, and well, now he's almost kind of looking like he's trending towards his downfall. There's not one point in which you say that really made him a liberal. Not even in 2020 when he marched with Black Lives Matter, because he had already been dipping his toes in the liberal pool before that. It was just the slow and steady trend towards it. You have to understand that a lot of our churches today are trending liberal, and they could be trending liberal regardless of church affiliation. They could be trending liberal regardless of church name or doctrine, okay? Yeah, probably independent fundamental churches are more protected than others, but it doesn't mean that they're completely immune, all right? It does not mean they're completely immune. So they've got to be on guard for that. That is absolutely one of the major ones. What about this, though? What about government overreach? Now, I know that right now we don't feel like the government's breathing down our neck. We are getting to meet, and I'm able to even be on YouTube, and I can say all sorts of things. Like, as far as I haven't been kicked off YouTube yet because maybe I'm not big enough. When I'm a bigger channel one of these days, then it may be a problem, but I can still say things like a man is a man and a woman's a woman. You shouldn't trans people at all. Abortion's murder. Marriage is between a man and a woman. Like, I can say those things probably, and YouTube's not going to get me. But I will say my earlier episodes used to get a lot more views. That is kind of interesting. Like, if you look at like my YouTube channel, let's just use this as an example on this topic of like government overreach and things. If you go to playlist and you look at the Shields and Arrow playlist, we've got we're on my 203rd episode now. And so if you look at the episode lists, going down, let's not go down to the very beginning, because obviously those have had more time to be seen. But let's just go to something like episode number 44. That has 125 views. Okay, 8 months ago, 125 views. If we go to episode number 60, 86 views, nothing very impressive. But now if we go to most recent ones, like if we look at our most recent, let's go to last week, The Left's Throne of Lies. See how many views. See, this one only has 52. And I have more than doubled my subscribers. I mean, well over doubled. I mean, actually, I would say 30-fold more subscribers. And honestly, when I look at the data, people that watch normally, I'm holding consistently the same. Sometimes I'm bumping up a little bit more. It just kind of depends. And I know I'm competing with some other live streams that go on during this time of day, but really this is the window that I've got. All that being said, I can still, for the most part, get away with saying things, even though YouTube may or may not be doing some things to not promote my videos near as much as maybe what they once were. But I will remind you that in 2020, churches were shut down. Many churches were. Now, interestingly, President Trump was the one that was in charge during that time. Now, I will say he had a tremendous amount of pressure to bend the knee to Dr. Fauci. So, yeah, the buck stops with him. He should never have let Fauci have the authority that he did. And at the same time, I'll remind you, Trump was wanting to have the country reopened by Easter. Okay, that was his goal. So the 2 weeks to slow the spread, it went a little bit longer than that, but Trump was really trying to push it. And when he said open up the country by Easter, everybody lost their minds. So Trump was trying, and then just eventually he gave up the fight against Fauci and the other elites. But we are not far removed from the days of churches being shut down. I am not very optimistic about the government being non-invasive on our right to assemble as congregations. It can absolutely happen. And obviously the blue states are the ones that probably are most likely to be threatened first. You know, look at Canada. Canada is just kind of a picture of where we're going to be in a few more years, unfortunately. And we've already seen pastors imprisoned in Canada. It could happen. We need to be resolved about that. Churches need to be prepared. So here's a preparation in my mind, okay? I don't care what plague afflicts us. We're not shutting down church. Never again, all right? there's my never again battle cry. Never again are we going to shut down churches and not teach the Bible because of some government mandate. I don't care if they put a statement that you cannot sit within 6 feet of other people. We know those are absurd rules. They accomplish nothing. Never again. Your rules are not going to override our assembly as a congregation. Churches have to be mentally resolved about that before it ever happens. That's one reason I think why it did transpire, because churches were not resolved, because it hadn't really been an issue. We hadn't really faced that, at least in a modern time. So we weren't prepared to handle it. But now we are. So when the government comes to cram down their rulings, because there's a cough, a sniffle going around, and I know there were some people that passed, and we know people that passed, and it is a sad event. How many people though know? How many people do you know that passed from the flu? They'll never really say that, but the flu leading to something else, the flu leading to pneumonia, right? People have been dying from the flu for a long time, and we haven't shut churches down over it, okay? COVID is still COVID is still that in that category, all right? We've got to learn to live with it. So, with that, government overreach is a major threat that churches need to be ready to deal with. Trent comments here, says, in my opinion, the threats would be government-funded public schools to slow the growth in the younger believers, government and media. That is a major issue. Now, it depends on where you are. That's a kind of a localized event to a degree, because some public schools are absolutely publicly funded, and yet they operate a lot like a private school, in the sense of some public schools are going to be more friendly to Christianity and Christian values than others, okay? The schools I were at, thankfully, I was able to be involved in like FCA as a teacher, as a coach. I led Bible studies in my classroom. So like those are really nice things to be able to do. But a lot of these schools, though, you're right, are not friendly at all. Not friendly at all. The larger city schools, even in red states like Oklahoma City, Tulsa, like those regions and those cities, yeah, they could be very problematic. And so I can only imagine in other states that are not near as friendly, okay, whether that's the Midwest or it's on the coasts, you name it, New Mexico, Colorado, places like that. Children are going to be indoctrinated one way or the other. I talked about this a long time ago in an older episode, that we are teaching children what to think. The old mantra of don't teach them what to think, just teach them how to think, it's absurd and it's not true. We are, no matter what, you're teaching them to think something. If you're teaching them mathematics, you're teaching them that numbers are logical and objectively true. That 2 is objectively 2, 4 is objectively 4, and if you add 2 and 2 together, you get 4. Like, that is just a fact. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. It doesn't matter what your worldview is. That is just what it is, all right? Objective truth. So you are teaching children something no matter what. And so I will say that, Trent, you bring up an interesting point, because the government intervention, government overreach may not be direct. It may not be direct. It may be indirect through their conduct. And I will say one way that government has already been indirectly undermining churches, attacking churches, is through the universities. All these universities are funded by the government. Student loans, right? The student loans, by and large, are from the government. Fed loan, whatever, Aidvantage, you name it, all the different programs, operations that they have. So these universities are just being funded by the government. And what are these universities doing? They are indoctrinating our young people. They are teaching them that traditional conservative values are wrong. Progressivism is correct. We need to leave all those old values in the past. Purity, doesn't work, abstinence doesn't work, and abortion is okay, and gender theory, you name it, communism, all of those things are coming out of the universities. So truth be told, we may look and say, well, there's not government overreach going on right now. That's only true in the sense that they're not sending the FBI. Well, there is some interesting things that are going on, like the FBI investigating Catholicism, the traditional Latin Mass. There are some of those reports. But while we don't have necessarily the FBI breaking down the doors of Blue Baptist Church and arresting the preacher for saying that a man is a man, and a woman is a woman, they are already seeking to undermine things. Just the other day, Jake was watching some TV show or whatever, and it was talking about dinosaurs. And the story is that, where do we get fossils? Well, you get a fossil because a dinosaur gets stuck in the mud, right? Can't get out of the mud, he's stuck. Well, then other dinosaurs come, and then other critters see the dinosaur, and they want to try to eat the dinosaur. So they run out in the mud, and they get stuck too. And so all these animals are just keep running in the mud, and they're all getting stuck. And then they die, and they're buried in the mud, and then they're preserved as fossils. Remember the last time you've watched like the National Geographic and a zebra got stuck in the mud, and like the whole pride of lions all got stuck in the mud because they were trying to get the zebra? That's absurd. That is an absurd story. Okay, that basically goes against survival of the fittest. If all these animals were so unintelligent, right, that's what they did, how did they not all go extinct? Otherwise, more likely, what if there was a gigantic flood, a massive amount of mud that just covered up all the animals instead of them all very cluelessly wandering into a mud hole to try to get each other? So these are the kind of stories that are coming out of our universities, and it's undermining the church. It all seeks to discredit the testimony of Scripture. So that's a threat. So we have liberalism. We also have the government, which just seeks to undermine the church, because the church promotes strong families, and it's hard to control people if they operate as a single, family unit, and they're not relying on the government because they have a mother and they have a father, and the father and mother are raising the children, and so you're not needed. And then if there is something that goes beyond the ability of the parents, there's a congregation that they can rely on that can help them if they need it. Other threats to the churches, though, what are some of the major things? While depravity has always been an issue, right? Sin, wickedness. There are things that exist in the church, right, to this day. We have, Christians who are struggling with addictions to all sorts of things, whether it's addictions to pornography, whether it is addictions to, nowadays, maybe even substances, whether it's alcohol or cannabis, you name it. And then there's obviously the other issues, right? Adultery, divorce, things like that are so prevalent in churches that we struggle with. But with that being said, there's even greater. Well, I don't know. No, I don't know if I want to use the term greater, because sin is sin, but there is still other issues that could confront the church, that could happen, that could take place, that we've got to protect against, that we've got to guard against. And so, what does that look like? Modesty in church has gone down a lot. If you go to a lot of churches today, the way that people dress, whether it's men or women, and I'll say men as well, because nowadays you get preachers that get up there and they're skin tight, skinny jeans and t-shirts, and it's absurd. All right, you need to dress appropriately. Okay, I'm more a fan of button-up shirts. Every now and then I'll wear a polo, but I don't even like to do that as much anymore. But dress modestly, right? And then women, it's the same thing. But how are these things creeping their way into our churches? Our youth kids, right? Our youth kids are being exposed to all sorts of things, and so churches have to be so careful to guard against that. There's a lot of issues that we are facing. So the answer, I think, is yes, in large, to all these things. These are all serious threats. Just as Mary mentioned, the threat of liberalism creeping its way into our churches. That is a major threat, and it's already happened to some churches. It has yet to happen to some, and yet there's some churches who it's happening right now, but they can't see it. They don't realize that it actually is happening. They've got to open up their eyes and realize what's going on around them. And then we do have the issue of government overreach. It could become in a day that it's much more upfront about it, where they're not trying to do backdoor avenues such as undermining the church through the through the universities, through indoctrination, but maybe much more actively trying to undermine churches in a number of different ways. And then we have the issue of all of the various media through which bad behavior, sinful things, wickedness, perversion is being promoted and pushed, right? Used to your adult TV shows, and I use the adult not in the X version, but adult TV shows. Like Gunsmoke, for example, wasn't necessarily a kid show. Like the adults would watch it. Compare it to what's on TV today. Our moral standards have gone down significantly, and so with that, Dr. Campbell just added role models our children aspire to, such as social media influencers and families like the Kardashians. Exactly. Who are we esteeming nowadays? Once upon a time, there were role models that were much more admirable. Okay, like let's use the example James Arnett's Gunsmoke. Okay, he was honest, tried to do what was right, stood against evil, and those are kind of the things that kids watch. But now there's real world people, right? Reality TV stars, reality personalities, and these are who the kids are gravitating towards. They're looking at people like Taylor Swift, and young men are looking at like Andrew Tate, who is somebody who has spoken out against like feminism to a degree, and weak men, but at the same time he's not a great example of morality, because he's somewhat of a, what's the word I'm looking for? A womanizer, I guess, right? So they don't have good role models, and unfortunately, are there any that they can find in the church? Are there good examples, whether it's in pastors or men and women involved in the church, that our girls can look up to and aspire to be? Are you being someone that they would want to look up to and aspire to learn from, right? So there's all of these different areas in which our children are being led astray because they're being told this is how you're supposed to act. This is what people want. Here's how to be rich and successful. You've got to have a social media presence. You've got to dress a certain way. You've got to talk a certain way. And that's the future of our churches. So if we want our churches to survive, we got to start looking at the younger generations and how can we protect them? Because if we lose them, then what congregation is there going to be? I mean, not the older people that are upholding the church. They're not going to be around forever. There's going to have to be another generation come and take over. And so where is that generation? Are we raising them up? Where are they going to come from? We've got to have them. It is interesting, yeah, Alan. You see the comparisons there. Like you look at Hunter Biden, a little bit of a scoundrel to say the least. And then you look at like Tim Wall, or no, not Tim Walls. I know he has one son that has some mental issues. I don't know if he has other children or not. Kamala Harris was when I was thinking of her, and it's her stepdaughter or whatever, but Doug Emhoff, his daughter, like how they've turned out. And then you look at like Trump's family. Okay, say what you want. I don't know. They're rich, live in the city, probably, enjoyed some of the things of the world. I don't know, but they're all nice looking. They have jobs. His son Barron, right, is in college, looks like a very well-mannered, respectable young man. And obviously, I don't know, right? Y'all looked at me when I was younger and thought, wow, what a nice-looking kid, and I could have been ornery at times too. But with that being said, yeah, the Trump children are admirable, at least in how they present themselves to public society. And part of that matters, right? How do you present yourself publicly? Yeah, everybody has their worst moments when they're by themselves and they don't always uphold everything they believe in. They can struggle with the things of the world, but at least how are you going to present yourself? What do you want people to see? And one of the things about society is, and we've got to get people to realize this, your true self it's not the one that you see, right? You don't see my frustrations. There's times I'm frustrated. There's times when I'm not acting pastoral-like. But at the same time, my true self is also not my worst moments. It's not in my anger. It's not in my struggle with temptation, sin, what have you. Like that is not my most defining moments either. Like take David, for example. David in the Bible. David is an interesting character because he had the highest of highs, standing against Goliath, bringing the ark to Jerusalem, all of those amazing things. And he also had the lowest of lows. When we look at David, who do we see him as? Do we see him as the child who fought Goliath? I mean, that's one of his highest moments. Or do we see him as the adulterer and the murderer? Truth be told, we don't really see him as either. Sometimes we'll maybe trend more towards his highs, but we kind of see him as the whole package, right? Was he flawed? Yes. Did he also do amazing things and was the greatest king that Israel had ever seen? Yeah, that's also true as well, right? And his son Solomon, if you could have taken out the last few years of Solomon's reign, then maybe Solomon would have been the greatest. But no, it'd be David. So with that, you got to take everybody as a whole. And so what do we present ourselves, right? That's a major thing. So I want you to be thinking about that. How can we protect our churches? What are the biggest threats? We got to do threat assessment. What are the major things that we've got to deal with in the present moment? Yeah, there's a number of things that we could come up with, right? Some more outlandish scenarios, things like that. But in the immediate, what do we have to address? What do we have to get taken care of right now? And I don't have the best answer. I think that the ultimate answer is good, sound doctrine, a good understanding of the Bible. I think one of the major errors that churches are making, Christians are making, is believing that they're building the kingdom. I think that leads to a whole bunch of bad theology. I think it leads to liberal theology because you're reading all those kingdom passages about a utopia which will be established by Christ. We can't build that, and yet they're trying to do it. And the problem is all of those things that are described in the kingdom cannot be brought to fruition by men. We cannot do it. We cannot bring about a world in which every need is met. We cannot bring about a world in which there is no sin. That is going to be something that can only be accomplished by Christ. And so we've got to get good doctrine right and understand what the kingdom is and stop trying to make it about us and understand it's a future day to be fulfilled. So in the immediate, what can we do just right now? We've got to teach good doctrine from our pulpits. That's one reason why I think you have, let's take Presbyterianism. You have a wing of Presbyterianism that's very conservative, but you also have the wing of Presbyterianism that is the exact opposite, and they fly a rainbow flag. That's because they start out at that basic premise of it's their job to be the kingdom builders on earth and the divinely elected people of God. And if you are not careful, you can easily stray over here onto the progressive, liberal side of things. And so we've got to combat it with good doctrine, but we've got to promote stronger churches. I think we got to have men in the churches. There's not enough men. Fathers got to get involved. They've got to study. They've got to protect their families. And we have to realize that no church is invulnerable, okay? Any church could fall to these things. So we've got to be very mindful of it. All right. Now, with that, I'm going to be getting some things uploaded for you. We got a few studies that I'm going to get uploaded for you to be able to watch, sermons that need to get uploaded for you to watch. Tomorrow is Saturday, so you won't see me then. But on Sunday, now I can't tell you that I'll see you Monday. I'll see you Sunday because we'll be live streaming on Sunday and you'll be able to watch. And so thank you all for that. Continue to reach out to me, okay? If you have questions about the Bible conference, send me emails. so I can help answer your questions, help try to get things arranged for you. If you want some recommendations for hotels, RV parks, or if you're trying to get with somebody to maybe where they can host you, let me know, and I'll try to get some things lined up for you, because we would love to have you. I'd love to have you there for all 3 nights. Even if for some reason you can only make one night, one day, Saturday is going to be the big day. If you can only come for a little while, that's fine. But if you can make it to where you can be with us, another major thing that it does is if our church can see the number of people that support the ministry and want to see our church be successful, that will really mean a lot to them, and it'll go a long ways to helping me as I'm trying to help build the church up in good, sound doctrine and theology. So with that, thank you all for being here with us today. I'm going to go ahead and cut a little bit short. Scott over on Worshipify says, "Hi, Mark. Sorry I'm late. Slept in, and then it took the coffee an hour to kick in." Sometimes it takes longer than that. I fully understand. Well, I'm going to wrap it up today, guys. Have a good rest of your weekend. I appreciate all of you. Be careful if you're out traveling, doing Christmas shopping and whatnot. I will remind you, tomorrow is the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, and so keep that in mind. There probably are still some loved ones, so some children maybe, who are going to remember that they may have lost a father, or children lost a grandfather, something like that. So with that being said, keep all those things in mind. Okay, be praying for them. Pray for our country, and we'll be back, all right, to stand firm on the firing line, right, defending the faith, the family, and the fellowship, because this is Shields and Arrows. I'm Pastor Mark Baze. Thank you all for being here with us. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I really do mean that. You mean a lot to me. It's been just a great pleasure and a great source of encouragement to me to get to meet you and to hear that you care about these things. We'll be back on Sunday going live. Thank you all so much.